Now that we've established some of the basics of working in PowerPoint, it's now time to move into the slides workshop section of the course. And this is where we're going to start to put together the presentation that we'll be using throughout the balance of this course. And just for a bit of context, the presentation that we're going to be building is a marketing presentation for a travel company. And this travel company is called Secret Adventures, and they provide adventure travel tours to customers. And we're going to start out in this section by building the title slide. And in the process of doing this, you're going to see a lot of different techniques demonstrated, and we're going to delve into the world of shapes and also text and imagery. We can then take those basic skills and build on them throughout the rest of this course. So the first thing we're going to do here is create a brand new blank presentation. Remember, you could press Ctrl N, or you can click on File, go to New, and choose Blank Presentation. Now the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the slide layout, and I'm going to change it to blank, because I don't want any of those placeholders on there. And I'm also going to save my presentation. So using the Quick Access toolbar, let's click on the Save icon. Because this is the first time that I'm saving it, I'm going to be prompted to enter in a file name, and then I can choose a location to save this presentation into. I'm going to stick with this folder and click on Save. And you'll find the saved version of this file in the Course Files folder. So now it's time for us to start building out our title slide. And what I want on this title slide is I want an image in the background. So I'm going to use an image off of the website that I showed you earlier, pexels.com. So let's jump across here, and I'm just going to type in the word travel. And if we scroll through these images, I think I'm going to use this one for my title slide. So let's click on it and then click the free download button in the top right hand corner. That's going to download it to my downloads folder, and I can then insert it through PowerPoint. So let's jump up to the insert ribbon, and in the images group we have a pictures drop down. Now this little drop down allows us to insert images that we have saved off to our device, so that might be your downloads folder, or maybe your documents folder, or your my pictures folder. We can choose from a selection of stock images, or we can browse the web for an image to use. I will say that if you're going to browse the web, you have to be quite careful that the image that you're going to use has the correct copyright attached. You can't just grab any image that you like off of Google and use that in presentations, particularly if these presentations are going to be shared with others, or they're going to be used for commercial reasons. So be very careful when you're using online pictures. In general, I always like to stick to images from pexels.com. So I'm going to go to this device, and let's click on the downloads folder. And there is my image. So let's click on it and click on insert. Now, do you notice one small problem with this image? It doesn't quite take up the entire background of the slide. I have this white space running down the left and right hand side. Now, what I see people doing time and time again to get around this issue is clicking on the image and then using the resize handle simply to drag this image out. Now, I will say that for some images like this one, that isn't too bad. It doesn't look particularly distorted, but it's not the correct way of resizing an image like this in order to fill that background. So let's do this the right way. I'm going to Ctrl Z a couple of times just to undo. Now instead, what we should be doing here is utilizing the crop and fill functionality in PowerPoint. Now you'll notice that because I'm clicked on this image, I now have a new contextual ribbon. And contextual ribbons are ribbons that only appear when they're needed. So if I click my mouse off of this image and just onto the background of the slide, notice that the picture format ribbon completely disappears. As soon as I click back on the picture, I get that ribbon back. So this is the way that Microsoft kind of saves you a little bit of space by only presenting you with ribbons that are necessary at that particular time. Now everything on this ribbon is related to formatting and changing pictures. And this is where we're going to find our crop and fill utility. So what we're going to do is go all the way over to the size group at the end, and we're going to click the lower half of the crop button, and we're going to choose fill. Now this will put these little black fill handles around the outside of the image, and all we need to do is drag these out to fill that white space. Once we're happy with that, we need to click the lower half of the crop button again and tell PowerPoint to fill that blank space. And what it effectively does is it zooms into the picture as opposed to distorting it. So you might find that you do lose a bit of the picture around the outside, but in general, this tends to look a lot better than stretching the image to fill the space. You can make any final adjustments by dragging up and down. And I think I want this to go about there. And then when you're happy with it, click the top half of the crop button. And what you're left with is a perfectly cropped image filling the background of the slide. If you do choose to use a high quality image in the background of your slide, there are some important points that you need to consider. For example, this is going to be the title slide of our presentation. So I probably want to have some text on this slide. Maybe I want to add my company logo and maybe a couple of other things. Now the image that I've chosen to use is quite contrasty. And what I mean by that is that we have certain parts of the image that are dark and certain parts of the image that are light. So if I was to choose to put white text over the top here, whilst that might look pretty good against the darker trees of this image, it's going to blend in a little bit with the sky and the mountains. And on the reverse of that, if I choose to use a darker text for my title, it's not really going to stand out from the darker parts of this image. And one thing you really don't want to do here is you don't want to have an image that's completely going to distract away from the text that you have on the slide. The most important thing here is the text. The image is just there really to add a little bit of interest and to convey your message. So how do we get around this problem? Well, there's a couple of things that we could do here. The first thing we could do is change the transparency of the actual image that we have in the background. We could fade this image out quite a bit so that if we put dark text over the top, it stands out more. So if I was going to use that method, I would make sure that I select the picture, go up to the Picture Format tab, and then in this Adjust group, I have a transparency option. And you can see here that I can choose different transparencies for this image, each one fading that image out a little bit more. So if you just kind of want a hint of that image peeking through, you might want to go for something that's quite transparent. Now, in general, this isn't the method that I use when I want to make an image transparent. And the reason why is because I don't really have too much control over the percentage of transparency. I only have these options just here, and I don't have as much control over the color of the image. You can see everything's just kind of fading out to a white color. So I prefer to use an alternative method that I've termed as a transparent shape overlay. Now, we haven't even discussed shapes as yet in this course. So before I show you a transparent shape overlay, let's just have a quick look at some of the basics of shapes. Now you'll find all of your shapes on the Insert ribbon, and they're here in the Illustrations group. If we click the Shapes drop down, it opens up our Shapes gallery. And all of our shapes are divided down into different categories to make them easier to find. And you'll find that the shapes that you've recently used will be at the top of this list, again, just to aid accessibility. So this is pretty simple to add shapes. We just select the shape we want to add. For example, I'm going to click on the rectangle. Notice that as soon as I do that, my cursor changes to a crosshair and I can now start to draw my shape. Now I'm going to draw a big rectangle over the entire background image. So let's start up in the corner. I'm going to click and drag, and notice this is a real free form shape that I can draw. I'm not locked into drawing a square or a certain size rectangle. I can pretty much draw whatever I want. So let's drag this all the way over the image and let go. Now notice that the shape is blue. And also notice that I now have a new contextual ribbon called Shape Format, which contains all of my options for changing and formatting this shape. Now, the default color of shapes that you insert into your PowerPoint presentations are again very much controlled by the theme that you have in use in your presentation. So I'm using that very basic office theme, and this is the default shape color for that office theme. What you also might notice, and is quite hard to see, but round the outside of this shape I actually have a very thin outline border by default. Now, if I want to make any modifications to this shape, so maybe I want to change the color from blue to something else, or maybe I want to remove that outside border or even make the border thicker, I can do all of that from the Shape Format ribbon. Notice here in the Shape Styles group, we have a Shape Fill drop-down, which will allow me to change the color of the actual shape. I have Shape Outline, so again I can choose a different outline color for this shape. So if I was to choose something like red, let's just do that, I could also choose the weight of that line as well. So if I wanted a really thick line, I could go for something like that. Now, I'm not going to go too much further into shapes at this stage, because we do have a whole lesson on drawing and formatting shapes. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say that I don't want any outline on this shape. And I'm also going to change the shape fill color to this dark green. And now what I can do is I can adjust the transparency of this shape as opposed to changing the image. So if I right-click my mouse and go into Format Shape from the contextual menu, this is going to open up a pane on the right-hand side, which gives me a lot more options when it comes to formatting my shapes. And there is quite a bit of crossover here. I can do things like change the shape fill and the line, but notice that I have a transparency slider here. And if I start to drag this up, it lets more of that image through, or I can drag it down to let less of the image through. So if I just want a hint of the image poking through, I really have a lot more control than using the transparency options on the picture format ribbon. So this is the method that I prefer to use. It also means that I can choose the color of this shape as well. So if I don't like green, I can choose something else. So I'm going to set this to 17%. And now if I was to put a light colored text over the top of this, we can still see a hint of that image. We're still getting our message across, but the text is still clear. Now, before we go on any further into creating this title slide, I just want to run over some of the basics of working with shapes in PowerPoint. So for this, I'm just very quickly going to insert a new blank slide. Now, as we've seen, we can access our shapes from the Insert ribbon in the Shapes gallery. And if I was to select the rectangle again, as we saw, I can draw this in very much of a free form fashion. But what if I wanted to draw a square? We don't have a square shape, we only have a rectangle. Now I could try and get it right by kind of dragging like this, but it might not be an exact square. We have the same problem if we want to insert a circle. If we go back to the Insert ribbon, go to Shapes, notice that we don't have a circle, we only have an oval. If I select this and try to draw a circle, again, it's going to be quite difficult for me to get this exactly right. So if we want to draw a square or a circle and effectively lock the aspect ratio as we're dragging, we need to hold down our Shift key as we drag those handles out. So let's do it again. Let's try and draw a square. This time I'm going to hold down Shift, click and drag, and I get a perfect square. If I do the same with the oval, hold down Shift, drag, and I get a circle. Notice that both of these shapes are showing in that default blue color. Now, with shapes, we can apply a lot of formatting to these. We've seen that we've got a shape format ribbon where we can do things like change the fill color. We can change the outline color. We can even make the outline a lot thicker. And we can even apply things like shape effects. So if you want to have a shadow effect on your shape, you can just see that just there. We can definitely do that as well. What about something like a reflection to give us a completely different effect? I can also edit any shape that I've added to a slide. For example, if I draw a square and then I change my mind and decide that I want a triangle, I don't have to delete this out and redraw the triangle. What I can do is, using the shape format ribbon, I can go across to the Insert Shapes group, and we have an Edit Shape box just here. I can go to Change Shape. It's going to open up my Shapes gallery, and then I can just choose the shape that I want to change it to. So let's change this to an isosceles triangle. And there we go. It's as simple as that. Also notice that when we are clicked on a shape, we get our resize handles around the outside. So this means that I can drag this in or drag it out to resize it. And again, if you want to resize this equally, so you want to lock the aspect ratio, you need to make sure you hold down Shift as you drag to keep that shape even. If you don't do that, it's kind of going to be all over the place. Now notice that one of these handles is showing in a different color. We have this little orange handle just here. And this allows us to basically distort this object somewhat. So if I click and drag, I can kind of drag it over to the side and effectively create different shapes. And of course, we also have this curly arrow at the top. And this is going to allow us to rotate our shapes around. And aside from all of these different ways that we can format shapes, we also have an additional right-click menu. So if we right-click, notice towards the bottom, we have Format Shape. And this is going to open up a pane on the right-hand side, which gives us some of the same options that we have on the Shape Format ribbon, but we also do have some extra ones in here as well. So you can really kind of go to town on your formatting of your shapes. So don't forget about that right-click menu as well. If I want to add text within a shape, again, I can right-click and notice that we have an Edit Text option. That's going to put my cursor inside, and I can then type whatever text I want to type. And I can format this text like any other text. So if I want to change this to black and maybe make it a bit bigger, I can definitely do that as well. I can even get really granular on manipulating these shapes. So if I select this triangle and jump back up to Shape Format, if we go back to the Edit Shape drop-down, notice we have an Edit Points option just here. That gives me these points at the corners of this triangle, and I can drag these and really change the way that this shape looks, and I can create lots of other weird and wonderful shapes. So if you have a specific shape that you want to create, but you can't find it in the Shapes gallery, this is sometimes a good option. So now we have a basic understanding of how to draw shapes, how to format them. Let's delete out this slide and let's add some shapes onto our title slide. Now I'm not going to do anything too fancy here. I'm simply going to have two rectangles at the top and at the bottom. So let's jump up to Insert, let's go to Shapes and select the Rectangle tool. I'm going to click in the top corner and I'm just going to drag all the way across so that we kind of have this bar running across the top. Now I'm going to remove the shape outline, and I'm also going to change the color of this shape as well. And I'm just going to make this a dark green. I want it to really kind of blend in with that background, but just add a little bit of interest. Now I want the same thing at the bottom of this slide. So now that I've formatted this shape, I can simply duplicate it by pressing Ctrl D. And now I can just drag this all the way down to the bottom and make sure that it's lined up. So a very simple usage of a couple of shapes there. We are going to be using shapes a lot more in a lot of different ways throughout the balance of this course. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can add shapes into our PowerPoint presentation. And one thing you may have noticed is that once we've drawn one shape, the Shape tool disables, and if we want to draw another one, we have to go back to the Insert ribbon. Now, if you're drawing a lot of shapes, this can get to be a pain. So I want to just show you a quick trick to effectively lock the drawing mode, and you can then draw lots of shapes. So let's go back to Insert and into Shapes. And just to demonstrate what I mean, in case you didn't quite catch it, if I select the Rectangle tool and draw a rectangle, if I want to draw another rectangle, I need to go back to Insert, go back into Shape, select the shape again, and draw another one. So that's what I mean. It can be quite time consuming if you have a lot of shapes to draw on your slide. So what we can do instead, let's just delete both of those out. We can go into Insert, we can open up our Shapes library, and we can right click on the shape that we want to draw and choose Lock Drawing Mode. So that means now I can just carry on drawing shapes until my heart's content, and drawing mode won't be disabled until I press the Escape key on my keyboard. So that makes life a lot simpler. Now notice that I'm just going through and deleting these shapes. I'm simply selecting them and pressing the Delete key. If you want to select multiple shapes, simply select one of them, hold down Shift, and then select the others. Now we have a whole lesson coming up on selecting and grouping and things like that, so I'm going to show you a few other methods you can use when you have a lot of shapes a bit later on. But for now, we'll just select these three and press the Delete key on our keyboard. The other little tip I wanted to show you here was how to change your default shape. As we've seen, because of the theme that I'm using, when I draw a shape, it's this particular style. It's a blue fill, and we have a very slight darker blue outline. Now it might be that every time I draw a shape, I find myself selecting it and changing the fill color to something maybe that my company uses. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we could just simply select the default shape and use that instead of the one that comes with the theme? Well, the good news is that you can do that. So maybe every time I draw a shape, it more often than not has to be this orange color. And maybe I need to have a darker orange outline, which is 4.5 points thick. Maybe this is the shape that I always have to draw. So what I can do here is right click on this shape and I can choose to set it as my default shape. So now every time I go to draw a shape, and it doesn't matter what shape I draw, it's going to be in that format. So this is another little time-saving trick that I would definitely take the time to do. Draw a shape, format it as you like, and then that can be your default shape. It doesn't stop you from going in and changing the fill again, but it just means that if you have company branding or a certain way that your shapes must look, you don't have to keep changing the formatting each time you draw a shape. In this lesson, we're going to talk about merging shapes, because merging shapes is a really cool little utility that allows you to do a few different things. We can merge shapes together to create brand new shapes. We can break shapes up, and we can also use our merge shapes options to create some really cool text effects. So let me show you a few examples and then I'll leave you to have a play around with these. Now let's just start by inserting a new blank slide and take a look at some of the basics of merging shapes. Now in order to merge shapes, you need to make sure that you have more than one shape on your slide. So I'm going to draw, let's go for something a bit different. I'm going to go for a block arrow, and I'm just going to draw an arrow like that and move it over here. And I'm going to draw another shape. Let's just go for a rectangle, and I'm going to draw that like so. Now what I could do here is I could merge these two shapes together and create something completely different. Currently, both of these shapes are what we call separate objects. I can click on them, I can apply formatting, and it's only going to apply to that one shape. Now, what if I move this arrow so that it goes behind the rectangle? Currently, these are still two separate shapes, but what I could do is select both of them by holding down my Shift key, going up to the Shape Format ribbon, and then in the Insert Shapes group at the beginning here, I have a Merge Shapes drop-down. And you'll notice that we have 5 different options when it comes to merging shapes. Now the first one here, Union, if I was to select that, it basically combines the shape together, and this is now one object. So any formatting I apply is going to apply to the entire thing, both of those merged shapes. So using this technique, we can merge different shapes together and create our own brand new shapes. Now let's just Control Z a few times to undo that and make these two separate shapes again. This time I'm going to select both shapes, go up to merge shape, and we're going to do combine. And you can see I get a completely different effect now. If I click on this, this is still all one shape, but it's just removed the part where both of these shapes intersect. Let's Control Z a couple of times so that we get our individual shapes back. Select them both, go to merge shapes. The third option here is fragment. And what this basically does is it creates a whole bunch of new shapes. So wherever they intersect, it's created a new shape. So if I move this, I have a smaller arrow. I then have the middle part as a separate shape, and then I have the rectangle with that middle part cut out. Let's Control Z a few times and take it back to how it was. Let's go back to merge shapes and take a look at intersect. It's basically just showing me the shape where the other two shapes intersect, where they meet. Control Z to go back. And the final one we have in here is subtract. So it's basically subtracting everything from the first shape and just leaving me with that modified second shape. So a few different techniques you can use there to create different shapes and create some really interesting effects. So now we've kind of got an idea as to how both of those work. Let's just delete out slide 2 and go back to our title slide. Now, how might I choose to use the merge shapes feature on my title slide? Well, at the top here, I have this green rectangle shape, which I've just kind of got running across the top as a bit of a header. It just adds a little bit of interest. Now, maybe I want to add a circular logo at the top here. So what I could do, if I move this down a little bit, I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to insert a shape, and I'm going to choose the oval tool. I'm going to hold down Shift because I want an exact circle, and let's make it, think about that big. I'm going to format the circle so it's exactly the same as the rectangle at the top. Now, there is a very quick technique that you can use in order to get exactly the same formatting for this circle, but we're actually going to discuss it in a later lesson. So for the time being, I'm just going to manually change the colors of this circle. So let's go up to Shape Fill, and I think it's this green that I used. Yes, that looks about right. And we're going to turn off the shape outline. What I'm now going to do is move this so that it's kind of halfway in between this bar, and I also want it to be in the middle of the slide. Now notice that I'm using the guidelines there to get that in the exact position. And again, we have an entire lesson dedicated to aligning and using grid lines and guides, so that's coming up in the next section. For the time being, I'm just going to place this just here. So now what I could do is merge the green rectangle and the green circle together so that this is kind of one object. It's a header. So let's select both of these, go to Merge Shapes, and I'm going to say Union, and now this is all one shape. So let's just move that into position because we're going to place a little logo in this circle in a moment. Now, the final fun thing that I want to show you when it comes to using that Merge Shapes tool is how you can use it to create some really cool text effects. So we're going to start out here by simply inserting a text box. So let's go for text box. Now, we're just using this as an example. I'm probably not going to keep this on the title slide, so we'll just type in the word travel. And just to demonstrate this, I need to use a font that's pretty thick. So let's take a look at what we have. And I think I'm going to go for, let's go for something like that, Bauhaus 93. Now I'm going to take this font up so that it's rather large. So let's take that all the way up to 96. In fact, I'm going to make that a bit bigger. Let's go for 150. There we go. Now, what I'm aiming to do here is I want to fill this text with a background image because this is a really nice effect. So once you've typed your text, insert the image that you want to use in the background of the text. So let's go for pictures, this device, and I'm just going to use the same image that we're using for the background. So let's insert that. And you just want to make sure that the image is placed so that it completely covers the text behind. And then you want to send the picture behind the text. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, we're talking about what we call the Z order. Everything that you add onto your slide is effectively on its own layer, and you can adjust the position of those layers and bring layers forward or push layers backwards. So I want to send this back so that I can see the text on top of it. Now, if we go to the picture format ribbon in the Arrange group, notice we have Bring Forward and Send Backward options. So I want to send this backward. I don't want to send it all the way to the back behind everything, just I want to send it back one. So now we can see the word travel. Now I'm going to select both the text and the picture, and we're going to go to Shape Format, and we're going to use our Merge options. And for this one, we're going to say Intersect, and take a look at that effect. We now have that image in the background of the text. And of course, then I can make this look a little bit better by using my picture format ribbon. I can do things like maybe add a white border so that it stands out a bit more from that background. I could even add some picture effects. So maybe I want to add a shadow. Maybe I want to add, let's go for a glow. How about a green glow? I could even add a reflection and then place this so it looks like that reflection is in the water. And that just gives a really nice looking, effective title. So those are some of the ways that you can use Merge Shapes to create some really nice effects in your presentation. In this lesson, we're going to insert our company logo onto our title slide. And the whole idea behind this lesson is really just to show you how you can use that crop and fill technique, not only to fill the background of a slide, but also how you can use it to fill shapes as well. And this is a technique we're going to use a few times throughout this course. Now, the company logo that I'm going to use is just one that I've created in a free application. So if you're using your own company logo to do this, it might work better if you try and merge it into a different shape. But if you'd like to use the logo that I've created, then you're going to find that in the course files folder. So let's just take a look at the logo first of all. So this is the logo that I've created. Again, this is just created using a free app. We have the name of the company, and then we have a little subheading just here, and it's on a black background. Now notice that my logo is circular. So I want to place this in that circle shape that we added into our heading. Now the first thing I'm going to do here is actually just delete out this piece of text. As nice as it looks, we're not going to be using this on our title slide. So let's press delete. So let's go up to insert, and I'm going to draw another circle, and I'm going to make it, let's make it a bit bigger than we need so that you can see what we're doing clearly. So now I want to fill this circle with my company logo. And I've seen a lot of weird and wonderful techniques when people are trying to fit an image inside of a shape. But really, this is pretty easy. What we need to do is right-click on the circle and go into the Format Shape menu. Now, in the Fill section just here, we can choose how we want to fill this shape. And if you recall, one of the options that we have is Picture or Texture Fill. So let's select it. Now notice that by default, it's going to fill it with the last picture that you used, which for me was just that background landscape. Now I want to change that to my company logo. So we're going to go down to Picture Source and click on Insert. I have my logo saved off to my local drive, so we're going to choose From File. And there it is. So let's insert it. And you can see it now fits exactly inside that circle. Now I want to make sure that this isn't distorted even slightly. So what I would do next is go up to Picture Format, go into Crop, and use that Fill technique. And now I can adjust it and make it look exactly as I want it to look and choose the correct size. So I'm going to make it a bit bigger than it was. And I can move it around and just get that dead in the center, or as close as I can. I think it needs to go up a little bit just there, like so. Once we're happy with how we have it positioned, we can click the top half of the crop button and we have a perfectly cropped image inside a shape. The final thing to do here, I can see that I have a very slight blue outline on this shape. So let's go to Shape Format, and we're going to say No Outline. So now that I have this image, I kind of want to place it up here inside this circle. So I'm just going to resize this by holding down the Shift key and dragging in the diagonal handle. And we're going to do a little bit of guesswork here. I'm going to place it up here. And actually, I think I've got that dead correct. If I wanted to have a bit of a green border, I could make that slightly smaller and then reposition that inside. Now, notice here, if I zoom in so you can see this a little bit better, it's quite hard to position this using my mouse and get it exactly right. So what you can do are use your arrow keys just to nudge the image into place. It gives you a little bit more control when you're trying to get things extremely accurate. Now, I think that that looks pretty good, and we have a perfectly positioned logo image on our slide. It's now time to add a title and a subtitle to our title slide. And when you're thinking about adding text to a slide, you really need to consider the font or fonts that you'd like to use. Again, if you work at a company, you might have very strict branding guidelines where you're only allowed to use certain fonts, which is absolutely fine. But if you're in a position where you can use any font, then always make sure that you're using fonts that work together. And it is best practice when you're working in PowerPoint not to use too many different types of fonts. So try and be consistent in the font that you're using. You don't really want to pick 5 or 6 different fonts because it's going to give your presentation an inconsistent look and feel. So in general, there'll be a couple of fonts that I use throughout my presentation, and I'll normally choose fonts that are part of the same font family. And of course, you've already seen my favorite fonts to use in a PowerPoint presentation. I am a big fan of the Lato family. I think Lato Black for a title and just Lato for a subtitle and body text is a really nice combination. But if you have your own favorite fonts that you like to use, then please feel free to use those when you're working through these examples. Now, because we are using a blank slide layout, it means that we don't have any placeholder boxes in order to type in our text. But that's not a problem because we can add our own text boxes. So if we jump up to the Insert tab, all the way over in the text group, we have a text box option just here. And we can draw text boxes anywhere on our slide and add text. My main title is just going to be the company name, and I'm going to have this in capital letters. So this is just going to say Secret Adventures. Now, if I was to leave it this small, it really doesn't stand out on that title slide, so I'm going to want to apply some formatting to this text. Remember, you don't necessarily have to select the text in order to format it. You can just click on the text box and apply formatting in that way. So the first thing I'm going to do here is change the font that I'm using. So let's jump up to the font drop down, and I'm going to use Lato Black. So I'm going to type it in so that I can find it a little bit easier in the list. There it is, just there. Let's select it. I'm going to change the font color to white, and I'm going to make this a lot bigger than it currently is. Now, when you're resizing font, you have a couple of different options. You have a little font size drop down just here, which goes up or down in various different increments. And you can see as I hover over the size of that particular font. Now, notice if I was to select something like 72, it goes on to 2 different lines. And that's simply because the text has reached the end of the text box and it's kind of looped around. So if I want this all on one line, I just need to really adjust the size of this text box. Now I'm going to make mine the full width because this is also going to aid me when I want to center this. Now I think that is slightly too big for a title, so let's take that down a bit. I think I'm going to go with, what should we do here? I think we'll start with 60 and see how that looks. Now my text currently is aligned to the left-hand side of the text box. And if we take a look up in the paragraph group, you can see that we have our alignment tools just here. Align left, keyboard shortcut, Control L. We have align center, keyboard shortcut Control E, and also align right, keyboard shortcut Control R. There's also a justified option in here, which we'll talk about a bit more when we're adding paragraphs of text to our slide. Now, I want this title to be centered in the text box. And this is why I like to drag the text box so that it's the full width of the slide. If you have a text box that's slightly smaller, so maybe it's like that, and you're trying to center this on the slide, if you choose the text box and then click on center, it's really only going to center the text within that text box. It doesn't really take into account the position of the text box on the slide. However, if you make the text box the full width and then align it to the center, you know that that title is going to be centered vertically, if not horizontally. Now, I don't actually want to center this horizontally as yet because I'm going to add a subtitle. Now, my subtitle is going to be in smaller font, and I'm going to use Lato font as opposed to Lato Black that we've used with the title. Now, what I could do is I could go up to Insert and add another text box, but what I find myself doing most of the time is simply duplicating the text box that I already have. So I'm going to click on it, Control D to make a copy, and then I'm going to drag that underneath. Now I can simply go in and edit the text and make any formatting changes. So let's change the format first of all, because I want this text to be quite a bit smaller. So we're going to change the font. Let's do that first of all, because I want this just to be Lato as opposed to Lato Black. So let's choose that. Let's make it a bit smaller. I think we're going to go with, let's go with 18 points. And now I can type in my subtitle. Tailor-made trips for adventurous souls. And I think this slide is starting to look really effective. Now notice that currently the title and the subtitle are not aligned vertically on this page. Now there's a lot to aligning objects on slides, and we have an entire lesson dedicated to this in the next section. So I don't want to give too much away in this lesson, so for the time being, just to make this look a little bit better, I'm simply going to select both text boxes by holding down Shift, and I'm just going to move them down a bit using my arrow keys. So let's put that, I think about there will do for now. Now, the final little technique I'm going to show you here in relation to how you can work with text is really just something to add a little bit of style to this slide. It's all of these small things that take your presentation from looking like a standard run-of-the-mill PowerPoint deck to a really modern presentation for 2022. So let me show you another little thing which I think can look really nice in your slides. What I'm going to do is insert another text box. So let's just insert one just here. I'm not too worried about the position at the moment. And I'm going to type the word explore. I'm now going to apply some formatting to this text. And for this effect, I want to use a really nice cursive font. And there's one in here, this one just here, it's called Künstler Script. I'm going to use this. And I'm going to take this font all the way up. I want to make this pretty huge. In fact, I want to make it even bigger than that. Let's go for 200. I think I want it even bigger than that. Let's try 400, see what we get there. Now this might possibly be a bit too large, but let's widen out the text box and see. Actually, that's not too bad. It's kind of giving me the effect that I want. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of position this somewhere in the middle of the slide. And if we zoom out a little bit so that we can see, I think that looks pretty good. Let's change the font color to white, and then we're going to take the transparency of this word down. So if we right click and go to Format Shape, in the pane on the right hand side, if we go to Text Options, notice that underneath the Text Fill group we have a transparency slider. And I can take the transparency of this all the way down so that we kind of just have this effect very faint in the background. Can you see that that just adds a little bit of interest and personality to this slide? Let's run the slideshow so we can take a look at it in its full glory. So this might be something that you could use as almost like a running theme throughout all of your slides. You can choose a word and have it just very faintly in the background. I think techniques like this look really effective and really elevate your slides. And the best thing about them is that they're so simple to do, simply using text boxes and a bit of transparency. So we're just about finished designing our really nice looking title slide. The only final little tweak that I might want to do here is I might want to review the colours that I'm using for the title and the subtitle. And I mentioned a few lessons ago that I was going to show you a quick technique that really helps you be more consistent with the colours that you're using in your presentation. Again, much like when you're choosing fonts, you want to make sure that you choose a consistent colour palette in your presentations. And once again, you might work at a company where there are branding guidelines which really lay out specific colours that you need to use in your presentations. And once again, that is absolutely fine, but let me show you how you can be more consistent. When you're building a PowerPoint presentation, if you want it to look cohesive and flow together nicely, you want to limit the colour palette that you're using. Now, based on my title slide, I'm kind of going for this greeny coloured theme, sort of a bit of green, a bit of white. I could maybe choose some colours out of the logo, so maybe blacks and yellows. But I want to kind of stick with the colour palette that I'm using on this title slide. Now, for most of these shapes and objects, I've just used colours from my theme palette. But it might be that you've chosen very specific colours using the hexadecimal value or by going into that more colour palette. So a really quick and easy way to apply colours that are already in use in your presentation is to use something called the eyedropper utility. And this is a little tool that came out a while ago in PowerPoint that people still overlook or don't really know what it does. And this is such a lifesaver. I find myself using this all the time. So let me show you how it works, because it is very, very simple, but extremely useful. Now, looking at my title just here where we have Secret Adventures, maybe I think to myself, you know what, that white is a little bit harsh. I want to change the colour and maybe change it to a lighter green, or maybe I want to even pick up the yellow in this logo and use that. Now, instead of just trying to guess or match with my eye the colours that are in use, I can use the eyedropper. So the first thing I'm going to do here is select the title. And herein lies our first problem. Because we added this faded out explore, when I try and select the title, I'm actually just selecting the text box for the word explore. It's kind of sitting on top of that title. Now, can you remember what we did previously in order to change the layer order or the Z order of our objects? Well, what we can do is select the word explore, go up to shape format, and we can choose to send it backward. So now I should find that I can select the text box because those are now on top. So let's select our text in here. Let's go to the Home tab. Let's go to our font color drop down. Notice at the bottom we have the eyedropper utility. And if we hover over, we can see that screen tip. It says select a text fill color by clicking on the screen. So if we select the eyedropper utility, our cursor changes to this little pipette. I think that's what we used to call them when we were at school. And as I hover over, can you see in the square, it's showing me what color I'm currently hovered over. So this enables me to pick out specific colors from the background image or from anything on this slide and quickly apply them to the selected object. And this works not only just on text, but also if you want to fill other things like shapes. So I'm going to do my best here to pick up this yellow color from the logo. So I'm going to hover over until I kind of get this yellow color. Sometimes it can be a bit hit and miss. There we go. We'll go with that. And if I click, my title has now changed to that color. Now, I don't think that's particularly nice. Let's do it again. Let's highlight. Let's select our eyedropper, and then we can choose something else from this image. Now, I probably am just going to end up going with white, but just to demonstrate this, let's choose Let's go for a lighter green. We've got a light green somewhere in here. Let's go for something like that. Now this is going to blend in with the background quite a bit, but hopefully you're getting the idea as to the capabilities of this little pipette. If I wanted to change it to black, let's go for something like that. And there we go. So this is just a really quick way to pick up colours that are already in use, and it really helps give your presentations a much more consistent feel. Now I'm going to change this back to white because I think that is definitely the best colour, but hopefully you can see how that little eyedropper utility works and can be useful to you. In this exercise, we move into the slide workshop section of the course. And this is where we're going to actually create a presentation, so that we can practice all of the skills that we've learned in this course. And the presentation that we're going to create is for a company called Jupiter Space, and they basically provide workspace and hot desks in various different locations around the world. So the first thing I'd like you to do is create a new blank presentation. Now by default, you'll have one slide in your new presentation which has the title slide layout. So I'd like you to change the layout of that slide to blank. I'd then like you to recreate the title slide that you can see on the right hand side using the images in the exercise folder. So just to point out some key points here, we have an image in the background. We know how we can resize that correctly. We have a transparent shape overlay over the top, and then we have some text on top of that. Notice the font that I've used is Roberto Slab and Roberto Slab Black, and you can also see the font size there so you can get it exactly correct. I don't necessarily mind if this blue is a slightly different colour to the one that I've used, but try and get it as close as possible. And then in the corner we have our logo, which you'll also find in the course files folder. Once you've recreated this slide, then save the presentation as jupiter_space.pptx. That's all I need you to do. If you'd like to see my answer, then please keep watching. So the first thing I asked you to do here was create a new blank presentation, Control N or File and New. And then I asked you to change the layout of this page from a title slide to a blank slide. So for this, we need to jump up to Layout, and we're going to switch this to Blank Layout. I then asked you to recreate that Jupiter Space title slide. So we're going to start here by inserting the background image. So we have this saved off to the exercise files folder. So let's go to this device, and it's this one just here. Let's click on Insert. So now we need to resize this image so it takes up the full width of the slide. So we're going to use crop and fill. So let's go to crop, let's select fill, and then we can drag these handles all the way out. Let's go to crop and fill again, and now we can crop that picture. The next thing to do here is to add our transparent shape overlay, which pretty much takes up 3/4 of this background image. So we're going to go to Insert, we're going to use our rectangle tool, and let's drag a big old rectangle and let's make it about 3/4 of this page. Of course, we can always adjust this again later on. Now we don't want this to be blue, we want to fill it with a dark colour. And again, I'm not really too fussed as to which black or which dark grey you choose, just something that's quite dark. I'm going to go for this one. And I don't want an outline just here. But what we do want to do is we want to format this so that we can adjust the transparency and let a little bit more of that image in the background through. Now I think I'm actually going to make this a bit darker. Let's go for black as opposed to grey, and I'm quite happy with that transparency. The next thing I'm going to do is add the logo in the bottom right hand corner. Again, we have this saved off to the exercise files folder. So this is a simple case of just picking that up. So let's grab it and click on Insert. And there it is, a nice bright blue. Let's drag it down to the corner. Now we need to add our text. So let's add our first text box. I'm just going to draw that up here. And this is just going to say in capital letters, presented by, and then I'm going to have my name. Let's change this text to white, and we need to change the font here. So we want to use Roberto Slab, and we're going to keep this on size 18. So let's just position that in the top corner. And now we can add our title. Now I'm going to just duplicate this text box and then I'm going to modify it. So this is going to be our main title. We want this in caps, so Jupiter space. We need to change the font because what we want here is we still want Roboto slab, but we want the slightly more bold version. So Roboto slab black. And we're going to take this up to 66. Let's drag that out like that. And what I've also done is I've added an accent color just to one of these words. So we're going to change the font color. Let's go to more colors because I want a really nice bright blue. And I think this is the one that I use. So let's click on OK. So we're looking pretty good. Just a couple more things to add before this title slide is done. I want to add a line running underneath my title. So let's go to Insert, let's go to Shapes, grab the Line tool, and I'm going to hold down Shift as I drag, which ensures that I get a straight line. And you can reposition this to wherever you want it to be. So I'm going to put mine just there. And I'm also going to change the shape outline to that bright blue color. And the final thing to add here is just our subheading. So again, I'm going to duplicate this text at the top because this is pretty much the same size that I want. So we're going to add our little subheading just here. And of course, you can move these into position if you need to. And there we go. There is our finished title slide. The final thing I asked you to do here was simply save this presentation to a folder of your choice and call it Jupiter_space. So once again, we just go up to File, down to Save As. We need to choose our folder and we just want to call it Jupiter_space. And then click on Save.